Good evening to all of you. If you're just logging in, thanks so much for joining us. It's our elementary town hall. There's lots of new developments in the world of elementary education here in Berkeley Unified, and so we hope to be able to share lots of information and answer questions as they're being asked by folks who have logged in. My name is Brent Stevens. I'm the superintendent of Berkeley Unified School District. This evening, I am joined by two members of our school board. Let me first introduce Director Julie Sinai. Good evening to you. And also Director Laura Babbitt, thank you for being here as well.
Good evening, thank you.
And then I'm also joined, as always, by Jessica Lopez Tello, who is sort of behind the scenes and making everything work just the way it should. So we have a couple sort of items that we hope to be able to cover this evening. We have prepared a relatively brief presentation of details related to both in-person and distance learning at the elementary level. Some of these details will be new this evening. We've been working hard behind the scenes to put lots of planning pieces in place. And with each day comes a few new developments. So we'll be talking about school schedules, precise school start times for each of our 11 elementary schools. We'll talk about the revised distance learning schedule, how distance learning classes will be made, who will be teaching them, and then talk as well about health sort of aspects of health protocols as they'll be practiced in our schools. So with that, I'm going to propose to share my screen. We'll jump into what will amount to, I think, a 15, maybe 20-minute presentation. And then the remainder of our time together will be dedicated to both live questions and questions in the Q&A. Tonight, the Q&A section is enabled. If you'd like to type out a question, you're very welcome to do that. We will be looking at those over the course of the evening and responding to those questions. And then for folks who would like to ask a live question, you can raise your digital hand and we'll begin collecting a list of folks who would like to be able to ask questions live, and we will have time this evening as well to respond to lots of those questions. So with that, let's jump right in. And here we go. So the ground that we'll cover this evening thought about doing three different things. First, would like to talk with a lot of specificity about our elementary school in-person learning model, as well as the distance learning model. We do have a lot of information prepared this evening about COVID safety in our schools. I may save some of that information if it feels relevant during the question and answer session. I may refer back to some slides to talk you through some of the very specific protocols that will be in place at our schools. But the majority of tonight's discussion will be dedicated to questions and answers. We have shared many times over the last month or so that we have established a school reopening timeline. This timeline was really made possible in collaboration with the city of Berkeley as they stepped forward to ensure that our educators had access to vaccinations. It allowed us to establish school reopening timeline that is far more firm. All of these dates are now ratified by the teachers union in a formal vote. They are all official, and we are on track to open in the timeline that I'm just describing here. That includes March 29th, reopening date for our preschool program, our transitional kindergarten classes, and K2 classes. April 5th through 9th is still scheduled as our spring recess. And while we can't require you not to travel, we do strongly advise that family and staff not travel during this week. That continues to be the recommendation of our local public health officer, that all of us are doing our part by avoiding travel. Immediately following spring break on April 12th, it's a big day for us. We return our grades 3 through 5 to in-person learning. All of our middle school grades will open on that day, as well as the beginning of a reopening at the high school, Berkeley Technology Academy, and our independent studies program. And then finally on April 19th, grades 10 through 12 at the high school will open up. During the last several weeks, we've seen many more of our students on our campuses. We've been referring to this as the sort of first phase of our reopening plan. During this phase, we invited teachers to come to their campuses now having been vaccinated and with a little bit of flexibility in their distance learning schedule to invite small groups of students onto campus for additional support. We're looking here at the stairs at Cragmont Elementary School, and one of the very first groups to return back about 2 weeks ago. Here are some of the numbers that sort of as we've been expecting our staff and students to be returning. These numbers have grown gradually. They were pretty small, more modest last week, and have grown pretty significantly this week. You can see the number of staff who have stepped forward as volunteers at each of our levels, and you can see the approximate number of students on our campuses by the time we really hit our stride next week. Let's jump into elementary schools, and we'll talk about both the in-person learning program and the distance learning program. So as we start this, I do want to acknowledge that we're sort of at this moment as a school district where it's both a real opportunity for us, but comes as a bit of a pain point. That we're sort of separating the district, the elementary level of the district, into two distinct programs. Each program meant to suit the choices of individual families, those families who would like to return back for as much on-campus instruction as we can provide, and families as well who want to continue in a distance learning program for a whole variety of reasons. We just want you to know that wherever you're learning for these final weeks of the school year, that we are still a unified school district, and that we're going to strive to maintain the kind of community that all families and staff love and respect. So now jumping into our in-person learning at the elementary schools. We shared just last week, on Monday of last week, that we did arrive at an agreement with our teachers union, in effect to skip right over a hybrid version of an elementary model and go to a 5 full day version of offering elementary school learning to all of the families who would choose it. In this particular schedule, you can see that the learning experience is the same on every day of the week, Monday through Friday. The instructional day for students is around 5 hours long. I'm going to show you precise start times and stop times for all of our schools just on the next slide. This 5 hour long instructional day, 5 days per week, will then lead into the after school program for families who select it. The reason that I'm using words like about 9 o'clock and about 2 o'clock is that we will have to, unlike previous years, institute a system of staggered arrival and dismissal times. It continues to be the strong guidance of our local public health officer that we avoid congregation at certain points, locations in the school, and in certain points of the school day. And this means that each of our school principals will be sending out a more specific arrival time, most likely by grade level, and will be assigning particular entrance locations to our families and students so that they know exactly where to report in the morning and where students would be dismissed at the end of the day. We ask all of our parents and guardians to keep in mind that we will not be permitting campus visitors. There will be a limited number of volunteer roles on our campuses, including helping with screening, some limited office roles. But generally, we are not able to permit visitors onto our campus, and particularly not to walk through hallways or go to classrooms. Face coverings will be required for all students at all times, with the exception of eating, and with the exception of students who in documented medical cases may have an exemption from wearing a face covering. And if that applies to your family, please know that school staff will be prepared to work with your family individually to think about what exemptions to face coverings are appropriate. And then please know that we have many of our teachers who will be working in our distance learning program in order to sort of expand our staffing and offer both in-person and distance learning program. We will be taking advantage of some of our longtime substitute teachers, and they will be working across both of the programs, both in distance learning and in-person. And I imagine that we will be seeing at least a couple of substitute teachers on each of our elementary campuses as we move forward through the end of the school year. I know for families, it's been a curiosity exactly when is school going to start. It's nice to say that we're actually going back to normal for something. And so this is true for our start and stop times, that we're just going back to the sort of more customary staggered beginnings across all of our elementary schools. You can see then the schools listed on the left that were traditionally early start schools that are starting at around 8 o'clock. You can see lots of listings of 8:10 there. It may be the case that particular school communities adjust the start time by a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And I would just look out from your school principal if there's any small adjustment to these start times. But this generally is the sort of start time that you can count on. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see our later start schools. And the reason, just if you're curious why we have these different start times, is it permits us to essentially route our buses twice every morning, thereby maximizing the number of students who can take advantage of our public busing program. And then just one more time, your school principal will be sending you more specific information about the staggered arrival times and staggered end times so that students are being dismissed in smaller groups, not sort of all at once. We are offering our Bears and Learns program. It is worth noting that there will be some limitations to the capacity of this program. We're still following the same sort of social distancing conventions in our program. Generally, that means that classrooms can operate at something near sort of standard capacity, but not quite. For folks who are interested in reaching out about the Bears program, you've got here a contact. That's Ashley Stepney. You can see there her email address, and we encourage you to reach out about the availability of Bears seats. And then if you're interested in enrolling your student in the Learns program, you've got the link to the website that's there. It's Berkeley Learns at asapconnected.com. And you will be able to log on starting today to be able to complete your Learns application. We still have to reach out to PTA Council to begin thinking about the in-person version of all of our PTA-sponsored after-school programs. Please know that we will reach out to PTA Council and begin those conversations. We just haven't had a chance to do that yet. Limited bus transportation will also be available. We are required to implement social distancing on all of our buses. That means that students will need to be spaced at a 6-foot interval in all of our buses. That interval, I think, is going to dramatically reduce the capacity of each of our buses to provide a ride to school and from school. And I am anticipating at this point that some students may not be accommodated on the school bus to and from school. To request transportation, we ask that you send an email to transportation department at berkeley.net. You can see the email address there listed in blue. There's some information that we ask you to include in that email. That includes student's name, school site, and grade. And then additional information will follow. You can see there in the paragraph a little bit more of the information that we ask you to provide. And then for students with individual education plans who also receive bus service as part of their IEP, we do plan to offer special education related transportation. And that will be organized through each student's case manager. And so there is, if you have any questions, if your child has an IEP and typically receive transportation, it is your child's case manager who you can reach out to about transportation. We will be offering, as we always do, a free schools meal program. In this particular instance, like it's been for the last 12 months, all of our meals will be grab and go. That means both our breakfast and a heated grab and go lunch program. Grab and go essentially means that meals are showing up in brown bags. Students that way are able to pick up a lunch sack much more quickly than queuing up in the cafeteria. And generally speaking, students will be eating outside unless the weather prevents it. So that's true both for the breakfast program. That's also true for the lunch program. It's just generally a safer environment for students to be eating outside. And when students are eating, of course, they can pull their masks down. We'll just ask them to keep them tucked under their chin like we're all used to doing. And then they can return their mask to cover their face as they head off to their designated area of the playground to be able to play. While we're talking about playgrounds, each school principal will be designing a play schedule so that each class of students is able to play in only one location of the schoolyard per day. Essentially, every class will be getting an assignment. Students will be asked to stay in that assigned location. And then the school principal can work on rotating students through various locations on the playground. The reason we do that is something called stable groups. We will be working very hard to maintain students in as few stable groups as possible. A stable group basically is the same as a bubble. It's the same as a cohort. We've used a lot of words for it over the last year, but it's a group of students who don't mix with one another, who stay intact during the school day, and who more or less move around as a single group, thereby reducing the risk of transmission from one group to another. We want to make you aware of our partners at the Berkeley Schools Fund who continue to make available school supplies to families who want or need them. The winter hours for our Ed Hub are listed on the right-hand side of the screen. That's Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 to 5 o'clock. The Ed Hub continues to operate out of the Berkeley Adult School, and that's over at the sort of back of the Berkeley Adult School. They will have available lots and lots of school supplies. They come sort of pre-packaged in a bag and have everything that you might need. And then school supplies will also be available to families who are remaining in distance learning. So please do drop by Tuesday, Thursday from 3 to 5 in the afternoon, say hi to our Ed Hub partners and volunteers, and pick up some school supplies also. Do know that in the classrooms, we'll be ordering additional school supplies to limit the amount of sharing that's going on between students. All of our schools are getting a special allocation of funds that they'll be able to use with Amazon to be able to sort of purchase materials on a just-in-time basis to limit the amount of shared materials in our classrooms. We will be instituting 4 sort of special days of preparation. Typically, when the school year starts, we have a number of days before the school year starts when all of our staff are on campus. We do our trainings, we do our room setup. Now, because we're sort of more than midway through the year, we need to create some kind of break in the instructional schedule for our teachers so that they can all be on their campuses. They have a number of training responsibilities that they need to complete. That includes some video-based training, some on-site training, as well as additional follow-up trainings for folks who feel that they still have questions. They'll also be getting extensive tours by their school principals of all of the facilities sort of renovations or modifications that have taken place. Their teachers will be getting sort of much more information about ventilation, about how to use the now installed HEPA air filters in all of our classrooms, and as well sort of be reminded about the sort of key safety conventions that we'll be asking students to practice at all times. So these sort of transition days will take place on March 23rd through March 26th. These are the 4 days just prior to our TK through grade 2 opening. I apologize, I'm seeing a little typo on that slide. Grade 2, it's the TK through grade 2 opening that is on March 29th. During these 4 days, pardon me, all of our students will be essentially working on a Wednesday distance learning schedule. That'll mean that there will be a class meeting in the morning. Specialist teachers will also be offering some distance learning specialist classes, but not a full day. Our specialist teachers will also be on campus getting themselves set up. And we do recognize that this represents a break in distance learning instruction and appreciate that you understand that we've got to sort of institute this quick break in order to get back on campus and be well prepared for students' arrival the very next Monday. So I'd like now just to jump over and talk about our distance learning program. We do know that a good percentage of our families have elected for a variety of reasons to stay in distance learning for the remainder of the school year. Those folks who are remaining in distance learning will be experiencing distance learning in a way that is very, very similar to distance learning as it's being conducted right now. We will be operating a district-wide distance learning schedule that will be predictable for families, very much like it is right now. The day will start at 9 o'clock with a whole class distance learning session that will be live and on Zoom. And then we jump into 45-minute instructional lessons delivered by the teacher, again, live and on Zoom. The first hour at 10 o'clock is for the first half of students in the class. And then the second hour at 11 o'clock is for the second half of the class. Specialist teachers will also be teaching during these sort of down times for kids who are not on Zoom. And then as sort of an addition to this distance learning day, the teacher will come back and do another 45-minute whole class lesson on top of the morning whole class lesson and these half group lessons. So the difference is really 4 sessions, almost up to 4 hours of synchronous instruction for everybody, for all the children who will be staying in distance learning. And then in the afternoon at 2 o'clock, and again at 3, not represented here, specialist teachers will be offering additional supplemental enrichment classes. And by specialist teachers, I mean folks like garden teachers, cooking, music, art, and science. One of the most difficult decisions that the district had to sort of contemplate and ultimately make as we moved into this new model is whether or not to regroup our classrooms to be able to sort of maximize the amount of distance learning and in-person learning that we could offer to families. You can see in both models, both in-person and distance learning, that there is an expansion of instructional time. And the way that we accomplish that is by asking our teachers only to do one thing at a time, only be an in-person teacher or only be a distance learning teacher. And to accomplish that, we needed to regroup students. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how we're going about regrouping. This will entail the majority of our distance learning students being assigned to a new teacher. These are BUSD teachers who are accustomed to working in distance learning. They are coming from a variety of our schools. And so let me talk to you a little bit about how we're contemplating putting together class lists. And before I do that, though, I think probably a few of you are curious just about what percentage of families have selected to come back in person versus those who will remain in distance learning. So it is right now, after more than 4,000 families have sort of submitted feedback to us or sort of a selection to us, that 17% of our families will remain in distance learning. 83% of our families have selected to come back into the 5-day per week in-person learning model. So here's the slide I was talking about. This is how we will go about creating distance learning class assignments. So the first priority for staff, as they look at all of the families who have selected to stay in distance learning, is that we will first keep current classmates together. So you can imagine in every single class in our district, there will be something like 2, 3, 4, maybe even more students per classroom who are selecting to stay in distance learning. So those classmates who right now have the same teacher will be kept together. Then we're going to combine students together who come from the same grade in the same school, thereby maximizing the chance for students to be in class with kids that they know from their schools. And after we've done those two things, then we'll be combining students in the same grade with other kids in the same grade from a different school. Class sizes are going to be in the low 20s across the board. And this is the way that we hope through the creation of the class lists to create as much stability as we can for all of our learners. For families who are at Sylvia Mendez in the two-way immersion program, please know that we are planning to create a separate, distinct TWI distance learning program. Students in that program will only be coming from the TWI program themselves. They'll be the families who select distance learning. And the teachers themselves will also be coming either from the TWI program at Sylvia Mendez or will be bilingual. But that is the goal right now, is to make sure that all of our TWI families continue to experience TWI if they've selected distance learning. We imagine that we are sending out distance learning teacher assignments shortly for families in grades TK through 2. That will be 1 week from now. That's March 23rd. And for families who are in grades 3 through 5, we'll be sending out teacher assignments on Tuesday, March 30th. We will have a designated administrator who will be both working with our distance learning teachers to support them, interacting with our distance learning families. And we're also working right now with our schools to make sure that the connection between between distance learning families and their home school remains as strong as it possibly can be. So some of the ideas that we're talking about might look like weekly assemblies so that you and your child can stay connected to your home school community, and even check-ins with your current teacher. Lots of ideas in the works, but we really do value that every student who is remaining in distance learning feel connected to their home school. And then finally, please know if you selected distance learning, that does not mean that you will be removed from your school assignment. We're assuming that you continue to want to be part of that school community, and that in the fall, as we learn more about what the health conditions will look like, that your seat in your home school will be reserved for you. So please know there's no risk of losing your seat assignment because you selected distance learning. For folks who would like to continue to stay informed, please know that there's lots of incoming information. We're sort of in a very heavy and intense planning process right now. We do have live web pages that are on our home site. You can go to berkeleyschools.net. There you will see important information for elementary families. And we're going to continue to post updates, as we have already, about school schedules, about enrollment practices, and other items as they're being developed in the next 2 weeks prior to the launch of the school year. And then I'd love for you to also be aware, for families who would love to learn a little bit more about COVID health and safety in a school setting, please know that we will be hosting 2 special panels with UCSF CARES. These are folks from UCSF who specialize in COVID and risk reduction. The first of these panels will take place next Monday, March 22nd at 7:00 p.m. These will be a live panel conducted by UCSF medical practitioners and researchers. And then on Wednesday, March 24th, we're offering a second live panel with a different set of panelists who will also be talking about COVID transmission in school settings. So we do highly encourage you to join us for those 2 particular webinars. We're very lucky to have such an accomplished team of professionals joining us to speak live with the Berkeley community about safety in our schools. And then finally on this, on the right-hand side of the slide, for folks who are interested in learning more, reading more about health and safety in schools, would strongly encourage you to check out California's School Reopening Hub website, where you can see a summary of lots of research about safety in school settings. I've included here on the slide some of the key findings from those studies, but would love for you to know that California now has a comprehensive website available to families as well. So finally, I really appreciate that we made it through all of this information. I hope that this was good information for families both selecting to come back in person and work in distance learning. We owe our thanks to so many people in the Berkeley community, to students, parents, and guardians. I think you first and foremost have been in our minds as we've been planning and along the course of this 12-month trajectory. And we're just very grateful to all of you for your patience, for your perseverance, and your strong ongoing sense of community. And then we must thank all of our BUSD staff and labor partners who have been working really tirelessly, sometimes in ways that are simply unseen, to try and make the district function in a caring and compassionate way. We owe special gratitude to the city of Berkeley, who has over and over again stepped forward to support our efforts, including making vaccinations available on a priority basis to all of our staff. And then to all of the volunteers that have worked at EdHub and the Berkeley Schools Fund, over and over again, these folks have just filled a gap that our district was not able to. And we're just so deeply appreciative for everybody who spent even an hour, or for the folks who volunteer regularly to be part of the EdHub and support our families. So with that, we're going to jump into a pretty decent period of question and answers. We've got lots of time on the clock still. We're going to propose to do this in 2 ways. We'll be moving back and forth between the chat as folks are sort of writing their questions in the Q&A. And then we'll also be taking live questions as well. We'll just go back and forth between them. Jessica's going to serve as facilitator. She'll read aloud questions, select from the Q&A, and then I and board members, if they would like, will also respond to live questions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to jump right into Q&A.
Okay, give me 1 second so I can pull this up. Before I read the first question, I did notice that there are a lot of questions about parents wanting to know when they will learn about their teacher assignments and if there's going to be any kind of notification for them to know when they'll find out.
Yes, so we're planning to send out teacher assignments for distance learning families, first for grades K through 2 on Tuesday, March 23rd. And then we'll be sending out teacher assignments for grades 3 through 5 the following Monday, which I believe is March 29th. So you should be expecting to hear from the district with specific information about your child's teacher assignment. And then just to say a little bit more, all of the teachers who are working in distance learning are BUSD teachers. These who are folks who have volunteered, have requested to continue to serve in a distance learning capacity. They've been teaching distance learning over the course of the year. We may here and there have a substitute teacher working in distance learning, but by and large, I think our substitutes will be working in person, where they're just generally more comfortable and where they've sort of proven themselves as long-term subs for the district.
Okay. Do you want to allow somebody to ask
Let's-
the live question?
That sounds great, Jessica. Why don't we go over to the first one?
Okay. Matt Weber.
Good evening, Mr. Weber.
Good evening. Very exciting time. Looking forward to it the coming weeks. I was a little confused about the hours. I seem to recall on the school district board meeting that you were talking about 5.5 hours of in-person, and it looks like the schedule that you showed today, we go from 9 to 2 or 8 to 1, which is 5 hours. Can you clarify, please?
I can. Yeah, the student instructional day with their teachers will be 5 hours. So the times that I listed there, 8 to 1 or 9 to 2 are the correct hours. And we had sort of in the rush to assemble lots of details last week, a mistake on our part.
Thank you.
Oh, Jessica, you're muted right now.
About that. Okay, let me go back to the Q&A. This is a question statement from ASL interpreter Tanisa. I'm a member of a group of parents who are very disheartened by the inequity that has been previewed by parents between in-person and distance learning for the remainder of the spring. I've been asked specifically to say not everybody is happy returning in person. Many of us were perfectly happy continuing in distance learning, and we feel profoundly unheard at this point. Please address the inequity inherent in learning in-person learners, keep their teachers and their school friends, and dumping distance learners with brand new teachers with their peers from other schools.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I said in my remarks earlier that this has probably been the single hardest question that the district has had to contend with on the road to reopening. If you've been following along with our conversations, you've known that for several months, we were exploring sort of a version of a hybrid learning model that would have offered our students about 2 afternoons per week. The reason that we sort of started with such modest sort of hybrid learning plans is that we would have essentially been asking all of our teachers to conduct their lessons in 2 different ways, both in person and online. In order to split their responsibilities, it's essentially meant that all in-person families and all distance learning families would be getting only half of their teacher's attention. We did hear through many surveys a whole variety of perspectives on ways to approach a return to in-person learning, and ultimately recognize that by splitting the district in the way that we had, or that we have, that we would permit all of our instructors to focus on just a single mode of instruction, and ultimately be able to offer a better experience in terms of instructional hours, in terms of the overall quality of the program, if we made this decision. It does not mean that we, took it lightly. It doesn't mean that we didn't wrestle for many, many weeks with this, or that we don't recognize that for some families, this represents a disruption in the learning experience of their children. What I do want to emphasize again is that the teachers who will be teaching in our distance learning program are veteran BUSD teachers. These are folks who have volunteered to continue forward in distance learning, who have been doing that instruction for the year. These are teachers who generally, would rather be teaching in person, but for a whole variety of reasons during the pandemic, can't do that. And then you did see, I hope, that there will be an expansion of the instructional hours offered for our distance learning families through the course of this year, through the rest of this year. So what we've hoped to do both in-person and distance learning is increase the program quality while also ensuring that we have certificated teachers on both sides. But the disruption in class lists, the disruption, the assignment to a new teacher, we sort of recognize as a disruption and one of the harder elements of the decision that we had to make.
Okay, going to go over to a live question. Gabby R.
Hi, yes, you mentioned that distance learners, I believe you said, will still have enrichment classes. Can they keep their enrichment teachers? And if so, what about their connection, or if not, what about their connections to their band or their school orchestra or their library? Librarians have been tailoring book recommendations to kids they know, and figuring out how to get them books at home. My kid benefits from that hugely. And can their current class connections be kept at least socially, with their current teachers hosting occasional Zoom or outside distanced school social times? Has any thought gone into trying to preserve those social connections? And if not, for distance learners, why is that weight all being visited on the distance learners and not on the in-person learners?
Sure. Thank you, Gabby, for the questions. Those are very thoughtful ones. So let me talk a little bit more about sort of connections for distance learning students. So if your student is currently working with a special education teacher, you should expect that it will be exactly the same special ed teacher continuing to provide services. So we are not moving special education managers' caseloads in any way through this transition. That's also going to be true for literacy coaches, for intervention teachers, for ELD teachers. Their caseloads will remain intact, and students will still be experiencing the same set of supplemental services from the same teachers that they were prior to this sort of reorganization. There are also a number of sort of special experiences, like things like band, that I imagine will remain intact even through this reorganization. As schools, band teachers offer special sessions. I do think that those things will continue to function remotely, and the distance learning students will continue to be involved. And then I think we're just a little bit too early, probably a week or so too early, to really understand for some of our other specialist teachers how their reorganized schedule will work. Many of our teachers, like VAPA, art, music, science, will in the true sense of the word, become hybrid teachers. They will be on campus. They'll be teaching students in person who are on campus, while also setting aside part of their workday to be working with kids in the distance learning program remotely. And so they'll be rewriting their schedules. I think it's a little bit early to say on an individual by individual basis sort of what continued points of contact they will have. But what I hope you're hearing in my response is that many of the specialist teachers who your child now knows will remain intact through this reorganization.
Thank you.
You too, Gabby. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to go to another question. 1 second. There have been a couple of questions about whether people can change the option that they chose for distance learning. So for example, there are some families that felt that they didn't have enough information, so they kept distance learning, but after this meeting, they might want to change their mind. Can they do that?
It's a great question. So the answer is yes, but with some limits. So I did describe right now that, behind the scenes, we are building class lists for our distance learning program. We think there's going to be about 35 different classes right now in distance learning across the district. And in those classes, I imagine that there are going to be some unfilled seats. We also know over on the in-person learning side that there are going to be some unfilled seats. And I do think that we'll be able to offer families a period of adjustment before we start on either March 29th or on April 12th for grades 3 through 5. I also think probably 4 weeks later that we'll be able to offer an adjustment period. Now, that doesn't mean that it can be unlimited in capacity. We'll only be able to offer the seats that are unfilled, either in-person or in distance learning. But I do imagine that we'll be able to offer families a period in which they can adjust their choice and switch between one or the other of the two programs, either from distance learning to in-person learning or the other way around. And so I ask that you just keep your eyes open for more communication about that sort of period of adjusting your decision. Jessica, you're muted.
Doing this. Live question from TWI, Sylvia Mendez.
Great.
Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to start off by thanking Superintendent Stevens, Director Julie Sinai, Director Ana Basudeo, for being very active and trying to change and make the distance learning model more equitable, and listening to the Latinx and African American families that reached out to you and the number of allies. So thank you very much for listening to that and providing teachers for distance learning. I do have a question regarding the timing for the instruction of distance learning. I know right now it varies from for example, first grader, he gets 30 minutes in the morning. And then for my fourth grader, he gets about 45 to 50 minutes for his first session. Is that going to remain the same, or is there going to be more time? What is that going to look like, including the afternoon session, or the afternoon session?
Great question. So we are going to continue to offer 30-minute Zoom sessions for kindergartners. Lots of teachers still concerned that students at that age probably max out on Zoom at around that point. For families who are in grades 1 through 5, each Zoom session will be 45 minutes long, and that gives a 15-minute break in between each of these Zoom sessions. If you remember the schedule that I shared in the slides, Zoom sessions will begin at 9 o'clock in the morning with a whole class lesson. Then the teacher will be offering half group lessons, so group A at 10 o'clock, group B at 11 o'clock, each of those either 30 minutes for kindergartners or 45 minutes for grades 1 through 5. And then at 12 o'clock, the teacher will be offering, at 1 o'clock after lunch, the teacher will be following up with another 45-minute lesson. That's sort of an additional lesson compared to the current distance learning schedule. And then specialists will also be working in the afternoon blocks to offer optional enrichment activities for distance learning families. So it could be the case that your child is getting anywhere between 3 to 5 distance learning sessions per day.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks again.
Thank you as well. Glad you're here tonight.
Okay, the next question is from someone that wishes to remain anonymous. I have a child with special needs who needs to stay in distance learning. Will students in distance learning be following the same curriculum as in-person students? How will teachers with new students be able to appropriately pace their classes when they're all new to each other? How will you ensure that students who must do distance learning due to special needs aren't forgotten?
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that question. One of the sort of large pieces of work that teachers took on last summer was the reorganization of our curriculum at the elementary level and creating some common pacing guides across all of the major subject areas for elementary schools. Most teachers are following those curriculum guides. It's always the case by the time teachers get to March that there's some difference between classrooms. That's just natural. But generally speaking, our teachers understand where they are in the curriculum. We will be matching grade level distance learning teachers to the grade level that they currently teach. So for example, a third grade distance learning class will be getting a third grade teacher, not a teacher who's coming from a different grade. And I expect that that's one sort of important part of making sure that there's continuity, both in the curriculum and that you're getting a teacher who understands the grade level curriculum for your child. Teachers will naturally need to go through a period of quick reassessment. And we are working on devising a system so that there can be sort of a warm handoff between the current distance learning teacher and the coming distance learning teacher. You heard every time we can, we're going to be keeping teachers working with students who attend their own school, if that's possible. as another way to go about creating continuity. And then particularly for students in our special education program, you heard me say that case managers are not being adjusted. So all of your child's current service providers, whether it's your case manager, an occupational therapist, physical therapist, speech, all of those folks will remain the same and will not be adjusted because of this class list reorganization. So that we think is going to provide a lot more continuity and services for students who receive special education.
Okay, the next person is Michael Hammond. You should be able to speak. No,
Mr. Hammond.
hold on. I think I have to promote him to panelist for some reason. He should be coming on.
Hi there, Mr. Hammond.
Hello, Mr. Stevens. Is my voice coming through?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, thanks. I have a nice microphone for teaching music. Just a quick question. A lot of the comments on how teachers are going to be used in this new formatting doesn't seem to apply to the music teachers. For example,
Oops, Mr. Hammond, we lost you. We seem to have lost Michael Hammond right now.
I did see a volunteer sheet a couple days ago, but I'm not sure how that applies. And talking with the union and with HR, they want a doctor's note before I can request to be on distance learning. Thank you.
Mr. Hammond, I admit I didn't get to hear most of your question because your mic cut out. What I'm going to propose to do, though, because this is a town hall for families, I would welcome you just to reach out to me if you've got some questions about your own particular situation, and I'd be happy to sort of help you with some more information.
Thank you.
Great. And Jess, you seem to be a little frozen this evening too. Your video is a little bit caught. It seems a little frozen.
That's not
Right?
good.
You're still doing it.
Okay.
You're still there though, and we can jump over to a written
I'm
question.
still here. Yeah, we'll jump on to a live question. Give me 1 second. There are questions about why we can't keep enrichment classes the same. Music class, all the enrichment classes for kids. And can you answer that?
Well, the truth is I don't know that I can yet. So all of our specialist classes are going to be, as I shared before, they'll be starting really, our only hybrid teachers in the true sense of the word. They're going to be working both with kids in person on campus and using a portion of their workday to support distance learning students who are at home. They'll need to begin rebuilding their schedule with the support of their principal and with the support of their department manager. And I just don't know right now sort of what that will look like in terms of a music teacher schedule or, an arts teacher schedule. What I do imagine them working to do is sort of keeping classes intact. But because the distance learning day and because the in-person day don't necessarily align in terms of their schedules, I just can't predict quite yet exactly how specialist teachers will be able to maintain their current distance learning groups. So there will be lots of continuity between current services and future services. I'm just not quite sure yet about all of our specialist schedules.
Okay, I'm going to a live question from Tuan Mai.
Hi, that's actually my husband's name. My name's Sasha Mustakis, and I'm a 16-year veteran teacher in BUSD and a proud parent of 2 BUSD elementary school students. And on behalf of myself and a lot of my fellow teachers and fellow parents, I wanted to thank everybody for trying to deal with an impossible situation and trying to make it better. This has been so challenging for everyone involved, and I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work that we're all doing. As families and as educators, and it's really difficult. And I'm just really proud of us as a district for trying our best to be as thoughtful as possible about all of our learners and all of our learners' needs, and also respecting our educators. So I just wanted to say thank you from my perspective.
I'm going to take a moment to thank you. You've been carrying 2 loads, both as a parent and as a teacher. And so let me express my gratitude to you as well on behalf of everybody in the district.
Thank you, Brent. I appreciate that. So one quick question I had is when, as parents, can we expect to get some more specific information from our principals, like regarding the staggered start times or any COVID protocols, or, you know, any of that key information that we need?
I would expect within just a couple of days, Sasha. You know, we just set the school start times this morning. This is how quickly we're trying to move. And so we passed that information along to principals at about noon today. Here's your start times. We were glad just to say you're going back to normal. And then they'll have to begin to work probably with their teacher leadership teams to begin to establish staggered schedules. I've been reviewing school plans for the last week or two and do know that all of our principals have now identified entry points. They're thinking about screening procedures, recruiting screeners, and they may in fact have their staggered arrival schedule, their recess assignments, all of those playground locations identified at this point. If you haven't heard from your principal, I would expect that that's going to happen probably within a few days, because I know they're feeling as much urgency as we are to get all of these last details in place.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate all of your efforts.
You as well. Thanks for being here tonight. Jessica, you're muted again.
I am not in my game today. I just lost the one question I was going to ask. COVID protocols. People want to know what happens if a student or a staff member comes up positive, and if they would return to distance learning, or what that would look like.
So Dr. Stevens, there's a number of questions also about student testing, so maybe you could loop that together.
Yeah, why don't I do both? So let's talk first about sort of what happens if there is a positive COVID case on one of our school sites. We do have something that's called the sort of site COVID dashboard. It's available to all of our community members on our website, and we've been tracking pretty transparently the number of cases that we've had so far on our campuses. We have had no instances of transmission from coming to school or work. But there have been folks who have come to school having caught COVID in some other location. We do have a dedicated team of contact tracers. We have hired them. They've been trained by both the county and the city. And their job is to conduct case investigations anytime there is either a report of a case or a confirmed positive case. Decisions about sort of whether or not to isolate or quarantine, and those are 2 different things, are always made by our 2 district nurses working in consultation with our local public health officer. They maintain a really tight set of communication protocols. And after an investigation is made, essentially what we look for is whether or not there was close contact between somebody who is confirmed as positive and any other individual. So it could be the case that depending on close contact, that other folks would be asked to quarantine if it appears that they had a close contact. And it could be the case as well if we have a positive case in one of our classroom groups that we might have to quarantine a classroom. That could look like sending the students in that group home, where they would be required essentially to revert to distance learning. Both the teacher and the students in the program would essentially go back to distance learning, just that group, just that class group. We do have protocols for larger quarantine situations. Let's hope that we don't ever get to that point, but it could involve quarantining multiple groups. And there's even a protocol established by the state about when we might even close a site if we had sort of multiple positive cases appearing at a single site in multiple stable groups. Part of our method, part of our strategy for understanding the presence of COVID on our campus has to do with testing. For about 4 months now, we've been operating a testing program for all of our employees. Every single one of our employees is required to be tested every 2 weeks. And we make those tests available at 10 different locations throughout the district on a 2-week rotating cycle. We're also designing very quickly a student testing program, working with a second company. We've actually brought on board 4 brand new district nurses. The company will also be providing its own nursing staff. And in short order, we'll be offering tests to all of our students every 2 weeks as well. Those tests are the simple sort of shallow nasal swabs. They are painless. They will be free to families. There will never be any charge for those COVID tests. We're using a company that does insurance reimbursement. So we will be reaching out to families to help us with a bit of paperwork. And then it will not be mandatory. So if your family feels uncomfortable about having your student tested, it's not required. Although we will strongly encourage our families to have their children tested. It's just one of a number of really important precautions that we can take together to prevent the transmission of COVID-19 when our students are back on our campuses. Director Sinai, how did I do? Did I cover it?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more live question. Demisi Wold, you should be able to speak.
Evening.
Hey, Steve. Thank you guys every time you bring anything new update. But my question is, Steve, you said in school is we decide to starting 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. But how do you control traffic? Because sometimes healthy app is check-in by phone, sometimes it's die. And every person we go interns, check-in and healthy question. How do you control in 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, all students, 75% go to school? How do you control that traffic?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking it.
Thank
you. I think what Mr. Wolde, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is describing is sort of what it will look like when a family arrives at school in the morning. Every family will be asked to fill out a very simple app. It's just a Google form each morning, every single morning that you're sending your child to school. That form essentially asks families to confirm that their child is free of COVID-19 symptoms that day. That means no cough, no fever. There's a short list. And then when you submit your form, there will be greeters at the school who will be able to check to confirm that each time your child is arriving, that in fact you have attested or sworn that they don't have those symptoms. For families who forget, we'll have a special screening station where a screener will be able to ask your child some simple questions about their health and then move them on to meet their teacher. Schools will be having multiple arrival points. And your family will be assigned to one of those arrival points. So those sort of old days of everybody gathering on the playground in the morning, playing together, talking together, right now will not be reinstituted. We hope maybe in the fall that will be the case. But for now, please expect that the arrival will be pretty tightly controlled, that there will be arrival sort of stations, specific designated arrival locations, screeners who will be greeting your child. They'll also make sure that they get a mask if they happen to forget theirs at home. And then your child will be asked to go to a specific location to wait for their teacher. We won't be having morning recess. Students won't be permitted to run around in the way that we're sort of used to a school morning looking. So do know that schools are working hard on this. There will be procedures. I would expect the first time we try it out on Monday and Tuesday, the 29th and 30th, that there's going to be lots of hiccups. But I know our schools will be learning fast, just like they have all year long. And we're counting on the cooperation and goodwill of all of our families to make this as smooth as possible. So Jessica, I may, just noting the time, I may stop and make a couple of quick announcements, and then I think it's probably time for us to adjourn. Great. So this particular town hall presentation is going to be repeated in Spanish in half an hour. I'm happy to host a special Spanish language only version of this town hall. So I'm glad to have folks who would like to see that stick around. And then for tomorrow, we're hosting another town hall. This is specific to the concerns of families of students with disabilities, so special education families particularly. That town hall will take place between 6 o'clock and 7:30 tomorrow evening. We'll be joined by nearly the entire special education team. That's Executive Director Sean Mansinger. Most of our supervisors will be present, and they will walk you through both the presentation that is sort of focuses in on the needs of special education students, both in the distance learning program and in the in-person program. So we do welcome special education families to join us tomorrow from 6 to 7:30. We'll have a number of parent moderators as well, who will help to both facilitate the conversation and make sure that the questions are as probing as special education families hope they will be. And then finally, do look out for additional health-related webinars. There will be 2 coming up next week on the 22nd and the 24th. These will be with UCSF professionals, and we'll focus in on safety practices in school settings. And there will be lots of opportunities to learn about mitigation strategies being practiced in BUSD, as well as become familiar with the research related to COVID transmission and school safety. So lots and lots of family engagement events coming up, and we really welcome you back either in half an hour, tomorrow evening, or next week. On behalf of the district parents, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Director Babbitt, thank you very much for your time tonight. Really appreciate having you here. Director Sinai, thank you very much. And then for all your behind the scenes prowess, Jessica Lopez, thank you very much. Always make things work. We appreciate it. So good night to everybody. Please have a good night, and we'll see you all very, very shortly. Bye-bye.
Thank you for coming.